Thank you for joining us today for our Experience Trends webinar. Radi and I had so much fun pulling this together for you today. This is our second year doing this together. It's probably the fifth year that InMoment has done this work. And we're looking very forward to sharing our data, stories, and recommendations with you today. Just one quick logistic. Please submit any questions that you have through the chat. We will attempt to answer some during the session, but we will 100% commit to getting back to you and anyone who posts a question after the session. Our goal is to share our material in 45 to 50 minutes and give you some time back in your day. And while we know we both can get on a roll, we will take this as our personal challenge to actually hit that time. Also, all registrations will get a copy of the recording and our full trends report. With that, let's do some introductions. Radi, why don't you go first?
Absolutely, and thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Radi Hindawi. I'm one of the leaders on our strategic insights team. Really, our job is to help all the brands that we work with and all our partners transform that data into actionable ROI insights. And so super excited to take you all through this. And just so you all know, I am based in Toronto, Canada. So we've got a US representation with Jim and a Canadian representation with myself here on the call.
Awesome. Thanks, Radi. And I'm Jim Katzman. I'm one of our CX strategists in our client success group. I work with our customers all across their life cycle, from before they even become a customer through their implementation and post implementation as well. And my role is really to help enable our clients to get the most from their software and services that they purchase from InMoment. And that's why this Trends report is so exciting to me, because it's exactly what we're going to do today. And I've partnered with Radi for many, many years and just look forward to continuing that partnership today. So with that, we genuinely do want to thank you for joining us today. I'm not sure about you, but I think I've received invites or opportunities to download a report or join a webinar on 2022 trends way more times than I want to think about so far. Selfishly, I believe that we've taken a different approach to thinking about these trends this year, and hopefully by the end of our session, you will too. If we could sum up our findings, it is that our customers and employees are super demanding. I don't mean that in a negative Charlie Brown womp womp way. I mean it as a great thing, because they're forcing us to set the bar high and drive innovation and not to get complacent. Once again, not trying to be negative, just showing that it's a true challenge for us to keep getting better. And the great news is that when we went out and asked them through this emerging trends research how we can do that, they told us. So let's jump in, and this will all make sense, I promise. Radi, how did we go about our research this cycle?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we've been really doing with these experience trends for years and years, everyone, is this philosophy of data from everywhere. It's something that we get very excited about here at InMoment. You know, surveys are great, and we're going to be talking about direct survey feedback today, but think about the level of data that you can collect today from reviews, from social, from other types of indirect and inferred pieces. And what's really critical about them is the level of intelligence that you get. And that's really what we drive in this Experience Trends report. Now, one thing I should say, we're going to be spending very little time talking about how experience is important, and it's important to have metrics and so on, because I'm sure everybody on the call knows that's really table stakes. That's a given today. I mean, hopefully everyone here has that set in play. But where these industries are moving towards, and what we really want to do today, and really what we've been doing for the last few years, is talking about what's next, the so what. Think about 2022. What are the journeys going to look like? What are the expectations of your stakeholders? And when I say stakeholders, your customers, your non-customers, and your employees, which we're going to talk very heavily around. Now, this particular report looks at all different types of industries, again, bringing in all that data from everywhere. And one of the most critical pieces as well is we broke it up by the US and Canada. There's a lot of great nuggets and pieces that we're going to be going through. Now, one thing that I keep hearing about, and one thing that really, as we work with different brands, that we keep kind of jumping back into is this future of the generations, the future of the customers, the employees, the stakeholders, and so on. And I want to go back to my piece around data. Now, surveys have done and continue to do a phenomenal job giving us more information regarding baby boomers and Gen X's, and maybe the older portions or older age groups of the Gen Ys. But let's talk about the more recent emerging customers, the more recent emerging employees, and so on. And that's our Gen Z group, or our Gen Z persona, maybe even the early Gen Ys in this case. One thing we have to say, and we're going to continue probably to say, Jim and I, throughout this session, is that these individuals are less likely to take those long-form, larger surveys. They are looking for things to be more seamless. They're looking for more efficiency, and they want to express themselves and express feedback and overhaul, express basically what they need through different methods that we're going to be going through. So as consumers, it's all about seamless. It's all about an efficient process that comes to the table. And as employees, they want to feel empowered. They want to feel that they can drive impact across the organization, and making sure that people and really brands follow suit and follow those respective journeys. So we're going to keep touching on these generations throughout the session. I will make sure to answer your questions as they come up, because I do see a few pieces already regarding some of the indirect pieces, which I'll touch on in a few minutes here. So Jim, let me pass it back to you so we can open up to the agenda, then hopefully jump right into this.
Perfect. So yeah, so I would say this next slide is a little bit of an agenda slide, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time digging in because that's why we're here. Once again, just to repeat, you're going to get a copy of the recording, you're going to get a copy of the full report when we're done. But our trends span 4 areas. And the first one is this area of stakeholder expectations. So you heard Radi talk about current customers, non-customers, and employees. And the trend here is that the standards are continuing to change, that there's just no slowing down from that. The second trend is all around listening, and how can companies get the right information from all their stakeholders, those 3 groups, and be able to listen to their customers and actually act on it. And we know that surveys alone will not be enough, and certainly long-form surveys. The third trend is all around loyalty, and thinking about, once again, across all those stakeholder groups, what is loyalty all about now? What are customers looking for? What are employees looking for? What are the drivers that are emerging to help companies drive loyalty and keep loyalty as measured through repeat sales, employee tenure, et cetera? And then finally, as you heard Radi, and I'm going to release my inner Canadian and talk about Gen Z here for a second. How will Gen Z revolutionize the workplace? And it really goes to sort of breaking down a lot of current paradigms for those of us, as you can see on the camera, that have been in the workforce for a little while longer. Really, how do we think about how the workplace is going to be impacted by this really, really important group of folks called Gen Z or Gen Z? With that, let's dive into our first finding.
Absolutely. And you're probably going to hear me switch between Gen Z and Gen Z here, everyone. That's kind of my internal crisis as I work with all our different brands and clients globally. But that first trend that Jim talked about, experience standards are changing again. As Jim said, we have been talking and going through and doing webinars for the last 2 years. And this report, or this type of kind of a study, has been launched for the last 5, even sometimes longer, because we used to have different studies go out through this. But there's a piece that Jim said 2 years ago that I want to talk about again. That's when COVID had first started. That's where we were all anxiously waiting to understand what we were going through. And in that webinar, Jim, you said, #businesses have to move on, adapt to the new customers, adapt to the situation that we're in, and really keep adapting throughout the coming years. And that is one piece we have to follow today, because this part's really exciting. For the last 2, maybe a little bit longer years, we've actually been asking all these respondents across all this data one very consistent question. And that question was regarding, if brands begin to reduce COVID restrictions and precautions in the coming year, how likely are you to visit those brands and have that face-to-face interaction? And for years, if those of you who've been on our webinar before, we said we're close, but not there yet. What we're excited to say from this last study that we launched a month and a half ago, 1 of 2 consumers and employees were now more comfortable than ever before about going back into locations. They're happy with the reduction in COVID restrictions, happy with that reduction in precautions as well. The main question here that we wanted to gauge was why? What has been changing? Some of you might be actually guessing or hypothesizing what that is, but this is the indirect piece that I'm going to touch on for a second. One of the key elements that we began to see, that kind of link that potentially is, was around double vaccinations in the United States and Canada. We went ahead and we pulled out and scraped out ourworldindata.org, which has all this information. And you can guess today that that number has gone up. I think it's closer or above 80% in Canada and above 70% in the United States. But what we found, everyone, was in the previous study that we had done, people in January and February were not comfortable just yet about the reduction of precautions, especially here in Canada. But with this recent study, that number has changed. But keep in mind, now, as I'm talking about this data that we pulled and some of the social and review data that we pulled out, there's really no simple answer for entire population. So what we're finding is different personas. We have individuals on an employee perspective that are saying things like, we can still be careful, but I'm excited to see people again. I'm excited to see my customers' faces again. We have consumers say things like, yes, I'm happy to go back in, but don't get rid of those sanitization and distancing-based procedures. And at the same time, everyone, we have individuals who are not comfortable, who are not there just yet to leave their homes. They want to keep everything online. So one of the core things as you think about 2022 is the fact that you really want to talk and really listen to your customers across all these journeys. Don't invest in one over the other. Really spend some time and think about where they are, where they're going, whether it's that in-store experience, that digital experience, or anything else as well. Now, there's another piece that we need to touch on, because this is all kind of thinking backwards and slowly moving forwards. So let's really escalate and move things forward quickly here. A big piece, when we looked at this entire indirect and direct and inferred data that we looked at, a big question that we wanted to ask is, what is the next big trend across these industries? What's that next innovation look like? And I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, because as Jim knows, I can go on and talk about insights for hours on end, but I do want to touch on a few of these. Because if you think about retail, and we had talked about this a few years back, Jim and I, in another webinar session, one theme, and we've seen this with brands that we partner with, is this idea of pick up and walk out. I walk into a retail location, I pick up an item that I need, and I literally walk out the door, and everything is charged on my mobile phone. So that's one key theme to think about. And we know brands are starting to move there today. For FinServe or banks, for example, tap and go has been a really big demand, but this one's interesting to me. In the US, tap and go is definitely an innovation that will come up more often than ever. In Canada, however, for my fellow Canadians on the call, we have had tap and go for years. That's an expectation today. You're not going to drive differentiation with that piece. But what your customers are asking for is investments, self-serve investments, especially around digital wallets. Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, that's going to be very key. On an employee-based journey, everyone, we're seeing a lot of cross-industry-based trends across the board here. Let's give you an example. Call center employees. One thing that we're seeing is we need more training. We need more help regarding things like mobile apps, because we're getting more questions there. Retail, now that we're changing the way we work with our customers, we want to offer more personalized experience. Let's really help the customers get what they need. And grocery and pharmacy and so on, keeping things like curbside pickup, and also bringing in the digital in the store, something we're going to be talking a little bit about here today. So the core purpose of this actual section is to say, be ready to adapt, be ready to change, and be ready to listen and update as we go throughout the year. If you want to drive that level of ROI and market share growth, it's going to be absolutely key. And rather than me just go on and on about insights and ideas and so on, I want to turn it back to Jim, because what we really want to do in this session today is give you a chance to hear about some of our great success stories and how we've really empowered the clients and empowered the brands we work with to get to that level of ROI and overall market share growth. So Jim, if you're okay to jump in and take us through the story here as well.
Sure, but before I start, I just need to say, whenever Radi talks about tap and go, I always use it the next time I go to the grocery store, and then I find myself 2 visits later going back to my sort of insert my chip reader. So Radi's my personal coach to adapt to tap and go here in the States. Anyway, just an extra aside. So there are plenty of industries that have been impacted by the pandemic. And while there's no trophy for the most impacted industry, it's easy to argue that airlines are really close to the top of that list. We work with a leading airline who, like their peers, had to adapt very quickly to regulations, to starts and stops in travel behaviors, and many passengers that, to say the least, did not play well with others. They worked with InMoment to understand their customer experience impacts of skipped row seating, loading from the rear, a near 100% shift to digital for boarding passes, transactions, etc. But they've gone even further as the virus has evolved from the early stages of, absolutely restrictive to a period where things seem to be shifting to more normal, and now recently, unfortunately, more of a shift back to more heightened safety. And along the way, they focused on their most loyal customers to really learn what would move the needle to make their passengers feel safe. And they used this to really correlate those results to their CX key metrics. They've also focused on their employees a lot during this time by providing them feedback on how to make customers feel safe. In fact, they actually added very targeted questions and rotated them to really be able to hone in on what were the nuances they could implement to make their employees feel safe and to help their flight teams deal with the unruly passengers, et cetera, so that they could keep their customers and other passengers safe. The bottom line is that this airline has not stopped listening, taking some steps to innovate, measuring whether it worked, coming up with more ideas, implementing, measuring to see if they work, and they don't plan to. It's this concept of continual change, which is what Radi was talking about and what this airline is putting into practice. So Radi, you can go to the next slide just to wrap up this section. Each section we're going to end with sort of these how you can take action. And in this section, it's really all about being agile and acting quickly. So with things changing very frequently, restaurants, hotels, everyone's had to keep their finger on the pulse and change very frequently, but you can't stop. You have to keep doing it. And you have to also try to get as far ahead as you can. We don't know what's going to happen next from an inflation perspective or a virus perspective, but being able to sort of be on the front end, if you can do that and adapt quickly, that will be fantastic. The counter to that, or the complement to that, is that while you're doing this reactionary, you also have to really keep your feet on the ground and start planning for the future, because we know that there's going to be a continued evolution of how clients and customers and future customers, employees deal with us. So how do we start to prepare now for the next generation or the next big world event that we have to react to? And from our research, what's pulling in Gen Z, they have vastly different preferences from other generations. And so thinking about these demographics, not only the world event demographics, but also the stakeholder demographics, is just going to be super important. And finally, the one thing we would also say is, and it seems pretty golden rule, is just be human. We have 3 values here at InMoment: be bold, be invested, and be human. And being human is all just about listening, having some empathy, and doing what's right for the stakeholder, and then good things will come to you in the background. And so I think the one thing that we've really tried to get, and we've done this through helping our customers listen to their social and their employees and their surveys, is really to understand what are our stakeholders telling us, so that we can react in a very human way to just the general chaos that we all seem to live in these days. Radi, anything else to add here?
No, I mean, Jim, you say things so nice and elegant, and I take a whole bunch of slides before, so thank you for that. I think the one piece I always love to talk to you about, and our brands and clients about, and something I want to touch on, we're going to probably touch on a lot today: plan for future stakeholder journeys. It is a very different world out there. And the reason why I touch on that is A, it goes into our second trend, but B, that is going to be the differentiation. That's how you want to make sure that you're not being left behind, but you're creating the trend that all these other brands can now follow as well. And this jumps into our second theme. The way to get there will not be surveys alone. And again, I'm going to be touching on some of the questions that some of you are sending on the chat here in this section. The idea is that surveys are not going to disappear. They are very powerful entities. But the really core element is, do not have surveys as your be-all, end-all. They should not be the entire pie to drive that experience improvement and drive that level of actionability. Jim and I were talking to a client last week, actually, where we explained, and they asked us about this emerging Gen Z and Gen Z customers. And they asked, can we survey them with our long form surveys? And our response was, that's the problem. They're not taking long form surveys. So it's very difficult to find out from these Gen Zs or Zs if they're willing to take surveys by launching a survey. So again, creativity is going to be very key, especially as you think about what that future looks like. Now, this insight is personally one of my favorites, and let me explain why. We have been launching this particular question for 5 years because we had a moment, as I said, we're very excited and proud about what you can do with all this data, including surveys, to drive intelligence. So the question that we've been asking across all the data is very simple. How would you like brands to interact with you and have you share feedback with them and so on and so forth in the coming year? And for 2020, everyone, what was exciting here was the shift in mindset. We did see a significant increase in things like more micro surveys, simpler pulses that can be launched out where qualitative is actually driving the conversation, a level of actionability there. Social media, a lot of those respondents, customers, employees across age groups want to share feedback there. Brand and live chats, emailing the brand directly. We saw the same themes over and over again. Now you'll notice the long form surveys, those traditional surveys are still in there, and they're probably not going to go away. But the key piece to keep in mind is that we are noticing a bit of a drop, or a significant drop, I should say, across these groups. Employees in Canada, a little bit higher than everyone else, but my hypothesis is you're going to see that number go down, especially in the coming year, as our emerging customers, our emerging consumers, non-customers, employees change the game overall. Now, one piece that we have to also go back to is that Gen Z or Z customers and employees. And I'm probably going to keep saying Gen Z or Z throughout this presentation, Jim. But the core element here was the fact that when we asked them throughout all this data, social reviews, direct and whatever, when we asked them how they want to interact with brands and if they would use surveys or traditional surveys to interact with brands, only 19% of the US customers said that they will. Only 22% of the emerging employees said that they will. They are looking for more ways, different ways to interact and engage with you. And we're going to talk about one of those ways that you definitely want to keep in mind for this year. Canadians, slightly higher number. Again, a little bit surprising. My hypothesis is that number is going to go down and down and down in the coming year. So really keep your eye on what's going on here. So if surveys are going to be part of the equation, but not the entire equation, then what else should we think about? What are some other ways that we can really gauge these customers? One really successful piece that we have been seeing and working with a lot of brands on is social influence-based strategies. Think about these social influencers on Instagram and YouTube and so on and so forth. We asked these respondents using a targeted survey and indirect data, how likely are you to use a social influence code in 2022? Everyone, 55% of North American, 1 of 2 customers and employees in North America are likely to use those social influencer codes. In 2021, almost 67, exactly 67% of the population that we talked to, again, all the different age groups, had used some type of social influence code throughout the year. There is so much data to gather from this, and not just scraping it, because scraping data now has become table stakes, super easy to do, but the level of intelligence is so absolutely critical. And by the way, one thing you'll see in the report when you receive it after these sessions in the coming days is that these Gen Zs are now going to be moving that trend. We now have 1 of 3 Gen Zs who have used social codes in the past and will continue to use that in 2022. But our hypothesis is that number is probably going to become 1 out of 2 very quickly. So again, the whole concept here is to really think about it this way. Indirect data, inferred data, all the data that's out there today can really help you answer certain questions. When you think about the future of the surveys, you want them to be more targeted. Try to avoid having surveys that's trying to bring absolutely everything in or trying to encompass every single business question. And most importantly, a lot of clients that Jim and I work with have heard us say this way too many times, design with the end in mind. Do not just create a survey for the sake of creating a survey. Do not create research for the sake of creating research. Really think about what you're trying to achieve and build an entire listening program, an entire strategy, bringing in all this data to help you get there. Now, again, I can go on and on with these insights, but I want to turn it back to Jim because we have a great story that he's going to be taking you through in terms of how we've been able to change the game and really empower our client to think about the future and bring in more intelligence than ever before in their industry and across their different personas as well. So, Jim, let me pass it back to you here.
Great, thanks, Radi. So I think I want to kick off this section by saying, hey, look, one of the key words that Radi said was traditional survey. So I'm actually going to spend a little time talking about survey. I'm very fortunate. I get to work with a very popular sneaker brand. They're a lot of fun to work with. When this particular part of their team came to us, another part of their org already had a traditional contact center survey and a traditional post survey, store survey, but the bulk of their transactions are online. And they definitely skew to a younger demographic that Radi has just been saying are much more challenging to survey in traditional ways. So as we began to architect and implement this digital listening program, we took significant extra effort to think about how could we use a survey, because they didn't have anything, that was both innovative, got them insights, but didn't have the failure that some of the statistics that Radi highlighted a couple of slides ago could potentially happen. So a couple things that we've done to make this program look different. First of all, we spent a ton of time on design, almost to the point where it got a little frustrating. But what we did is we made a survey that really represented, looked like visually, and sounded like the brand. So we didn't ask questions about how likely are you to do X, Y, Z. We said, hey, got a second to give us your feedback. So we made it short and we made it conversational. The second thing is we focused on the metrics that matter, that whole concept of designing with the end in mind and doing something would bring them value. So for our client, it was all about ease. How easy is it to shop on the web? How easy is it to make a purchase? How easy is it to understand the status of my shipment? And so we focused on metrics that the demographic we were trying to get feedback from could relate to because they were going through the experience. And then finally, we looked at the program as more than just one listening post. We said, you know what, we're going to do something while people surf. We're also going to do something when they make a purchase. We're also going to listen after the fact when their product gets fulfilled. So when we think about a digital survey and we say, well, that's on the web, we did a digital program that included listening on the web. So I guess here's the results. Here's the punchline. We launched this survey and our results were unbelievable. We had tens of thousands of responses, flying in the face of anything we traditionally thought, but we knew it's because of the effort that we put through. So while we acknowledge that surveys as a primary feedback channel may be a smaller portion of an entire listening program going forward, we have proven that thoughtful, easy to respond, well-designed surveys can actually still be an extremely valuable tool for our clients. And since we recognize that survey is just one single source of feedback, we're going to continue to innovate to make sure that it stays relevant. So think about SMS invites, QR codes, meeting customers where they are, because we know that while the overall ecosystem of data is changing, survey is still going to be part of it, in some form or fashion. So Rod, if you can go to the next slide. For this section, our takeaways are all about the data. First, when we think about a plan, don't start listening without a plan. Design with the end in mind. Know what your business value is. Normally, here's the point where we would throw in like a fancy term like ROI, but our takeaway is really just to be thoughtful. Think about how you want to use the insights that you're going out to get to drive business value for your customers, not for you, for your customers. Once you do that, then the business value for you will follow. So be very, very thoughtful. Secondly, lots of people are talking about scraping data. You heard Radi talk about this incredible explosion of social. And don't get me wrong, we are all in on bringing in multiple data sources, and we're really all in on bringing social. But here too, we have to be thoughtful. And in our opinion, there has to be more action to scraping than just bringing in the data and sort of reading it. What's your action plan? Are you going to go back and resolve open issues for people that leave social feedback that's not positive? How are you going to take that idea and actually drive action that you can measure and tie it back to what you heard in social? Don't treat it as just another data source. Treat it as a data source that comes from a very specific demographic that can help you make your business better. But just don't scrape the data to check a box and say that you are. And finally, and this is, I don't want to sound like too much of a boomer, but don't get caught saying surveys are dead. I truly believe they're not. Yes, their role is shifting. Volumes are decreasing. Response rates are going down. But from a human interaction perspective, that one-on-one conversation at the time that our client or non-client or employees had some sort of transaction, there's still no substitute to me and to InMoment for getting that personal feedback and the sentiment that comes along with it through a survey. Just know that there are many other data sources. This is an ecosystem, and that to really drive CX, you have to use all of them, but surveys are going to still be part of this ecosystem for a while. Radi, anything to add?
Jim, as I said before, super elegant. Thank you for that. My dog literally just fell asleep as you were talking, so your voice just
that's not a good sign.
It's a nice, soothing voice that you have, Jim.
Okay.
That's what it comes down to.
Good recovery.
Right, that's what it is. But I think overall, everyone, one of the pieces that Jim talked about around don't just scrape data, but think about that level of intelligence is really key. And this piece here is going to be really exciting for you for a lot of individuals in the call that, similar to me, years ago when I was younger, had more hair, working in market research for the first time, getting competitive benchmarking data was super difficult, right? Panels and surveys and all that. But that traditional piece is about to go through a very heavy evolution, what we've been working with brands on. And that is because these loyalty indicators and the drivers are changing. Gone are the days where we could say loyalty is this linear piece. In order to basically drive it, here are the 3 things to do. There are so many different ways to think about this. And this is going to be very critical in the coming year. When we think about loyalty, think about your customers and your employees. It's no longer just about understanding loyalty in a certain point of time, right? So it's not just about when people are on your website or on your store talking to your call center. The new world, this new approach that we're taking is going to be around understanding where your customers and employees were before they actually interacted with your brand and what they're doing after. So again, going through the entire journey throughout the day or throughout the month, understanding what spend looks like, understanding what experience looks like on both the consumer level and also on an employee level. One of the core comments that we saw when we scraped out and really ran all these models across indirect data were things like, restaurant employees talking about, I'm getting paid less than competitors. But that definition of competitors was not another restaurant. It was a travel brand. It was an automotive brand. It was an entertainment brand. They're starting to really come in together across the board. So understanding those journeys, understanding where your customers are and where they're going, understanding where your employees are today and what potentially could drive turnover and make them choose a different brand or industry is going to be absolutely critical. There's another piece to this that we've talked to a lot of our clients and different brands about, which is how these industries are starting to merge together. So again, I go back to my custom benchmarking example. Years and years ago, when you think about a benchmark, how are we doing against our competitors? Give us some insight. That's not going to go anywhere. That's going to stay. But where we have really taken our brands and what we're seeing more with this data is that you really want to understand what other top tier players are doing outside your industry and bringing that intelligence home. And here's why. When we talked and listened to all these different stakeholders in this particular study, and I'm going to take FinServe and banks in this space here, we heard things like consumers want more self-serve options in Canada and in the United States. We heard that employees want more training to support customers that are looking for those self-serve options as well. But we also began to see other links in other industries like retail. Personalization of experience. How do we now make this more efficient and smooth? Travel and hospitality, more incentives for exceeding expectation. The roll off your actual employees here are changing. And so as there are more ways for self-serve to come in, especially in travel and hotels and integrations, what does that role look like? So again, all these industries coming together, all this intelligence coming together, being able to gauge not just your competitors, but outside tier brands through indirect, direct, and other data points is going to be absolutely critical. And I want to leave you all with one nugget, because this all sounds great, but the question probably in your minds is, and I think I saw somebody write that in, how would that actually work? And here's my favorite example to that, everyone. In the past, when you think about personal-based investments, financial services, banks, credit unions, audiences that work in this, or any audience that work in those industries today, this slide would have probably been the most important slide for you. But I have to say, everyone on the call, whatever industry you're in, you really want to listen about the insights that we found here. Now that we collected all this beautiful indirect data, we now targeted those particular consumers and employees and asked them a very specific question. One, how likely are you to invest in brands in terms of stock shares, so on in the coming year? But two, what is going to drive you? What is your driver for selecting a brand to invest in over the other? Now you can guess the simplest of insights. People were investing in brands because they want to make more money. Not the most surprising thing in the world. But this is the piece that actually got us quite exciting here. If my laptop decides to keep up with my crazy caffeinated brain, there we go. This is the piece that actually got us quite excited. Your consumers, your non-customers, your customers and your employees are also having more of an emotional connection with the brands that they invest in. 21% of US consumers said that they are more likely to invest in brands that they shop with more often. 22% said they are more likely to shop with brands that align with their lifestyle, that have a positive relationship with them, around 24% there. Canada, numbers were very similar. There is that emotional piece that is coming to the table more than ever before. Yes, there's the ROI piece, but these customers and the employees, by the way, which you could see on the right-hand side, these individuals are now looking for that new ways of actually driving and building the relationship by not just shopping at the brands, but investing in them. They're becoming part of your teams, they're becoming part of your organization. When your brand exceeds and does better, they're also profiting at the same time. Now, this is a very foreign concept for a few people because this is different than what we've seen before. But the fact is, these are elements to really think about. Again, when we think about loyalty, when we think about advocacy, there are now more ways to really bring these customers in, bring your employees back, and really invest and challenge them so that they are now literally investing in these brands, investing in your own brand, and hopefully not investing into your competitors at the same time. So again, cross-industry journey is going to be very key here. And rather than me again go on and on, I want to pass it back to Jim. Because as I said in the beginning, custom benchmarks are not going anywhere if you currently have today, but really challenge what you currently do today and ask yourself the question, am I able to drive and increase market share? Am I able to drive differentiation and so on and so forth with my current solution? And what Jim has done with this client of ours is really take things to the next level. So Jim, let me pass it back to you to take us through that story.
Perfect. Thanks, Radi. This is a great story to tell. So we work with a major automotive retailer who had come to us often to try and benchmark themselves against their competitors, very much in their space. But recently they came to InMoment and they challenged us to help them think about their customer experience in a different way, and not based on preferences from their competitors, but from the best of the best in CX, regardless of the industry they were in. Like, pooh, light bulb, like what a great question. They challenged us to look beyond benchmarking and create a custom solution for them that would not only be able to find out characteristics that were important to their own competitors, which they knew, but really more importantly, what is going on in other aspects, other retail industries, to help them understand what are those key drivers that drive customer satisfaction and then subsequently financial success. So once again, a theme you hear with me 2 or 3 times is I always talk about the customer first. Business results will follow, serve the customer first. And that's what they wanted to do. They really wanted to find out who were the white glove retailers, who were the best in the hotel industry, what is very different that they could do. The work we did, they analyzed, and we actually were able to turn it into a predictive dashboard, an actual tool that lives in our platform, not trying to be a commercial for InMoment per se, but what this predictive dashboard in the tool and in the platform allowed was like a new form of democratization of data. So now people across their enterprise could go into this dashboard, look at the levers that they had learned about that drove this great customer satisfaction, start to model and see what was important to their customers and how, if they indexed on a particular characteristic, the impact it would have. Really, really cool futuristic stuff. And it's given them an entirely different way to look at what drives loyalty and advocacy. There's really just no other way to say it. This was really cool work for both our client and for us. So good story here. So wrapping up this section on the next slide, our takeaways in this section are all about going beyond what we've always done. So first, you don't limit yourself to only learning from your industry. You heard the story I just told. Just like we're all consumers across other industries, companies across those other industries all have their toolkits that they use to drive customer delight. Leverage them all. Companies that get it right don't get it right because of the industry they're in. They get it right because their customers are telling them that they're getting it right. And they're telling that through their loyalty and through their repeat purchases. Secondly, think about loyalty incentives. And here too, learn across industry. While an early shopping window for the best details in retail might seem that it's only good for retail, think about it if you were offer a members only evening to unveil a new seasonal menu in your restaurant. So you can take this preferential feeling of loyalty and take it across industry. I often use the phrase when I'm talking a focus group of one, me, when I'm talking to clients about, how I think about things, because that allows me to bring in examples from what I do every day, whether it's going to Starbucks, picking up my dry cleaning, running to the grocery store, et cetera, but also the industries that I see. And so using this concept of sort of your own focus group of one, what's important to you, and how do you bring that to your company and client, regardless of what industry you're in. And finally, we have to really rotate on the changing customer base. And as you will hear, the employee base that is part of Gen Z. Their buying habits are different. The tools they use to make decisions are different. The way they pay is different. The way they find information is different, and so on. But make no mistake about it, their buying power and loyalty is going to shape commerce. They're going to keep growing. So understanding their needs, the Gen Z needs, and really listening to them through their voice, whether that's social, whether it's survey, whether it's research, whether it's focus group of one. I have a 23-year-old son, that's my focus group of one. Their buying decisions are critical, and learning about them is extremely important. Radi, anything you want to jump in here? And don't say I was eloquent, because I don't want to put the dog to sleep again.
Well, no, the dog has actually walked away, Jim. So hopefully you feel a bit better. He's bugging my wife now for food. So thank you. But no, I mean, everything you touched on there is absolutely it. And it really just opens up to our fourth theme. And I am conscious that we really want to end early so that everyone gets a little bit of time back. But I want to spend a little bit of time on this theme, because really this is going to be a core game changer for you. The Gen Zs, the Gen Zs will absolutely revolutionize the workforce starting this year, and this will continue on for the next few years. Now, as I said before, gauging this information with a survey is very difficult. If you invite 9,000 or 10,000 people to a survey, you would be lucky to get 1% of them actually be Gen Z or Gen Z population. They're just not taking surveys. So we had to take a totally different path here with indirect and market pulses and different micro surveys. But let me quickly touch on this. There are 3 core characteristics about this future talent that you are looking to bring in. Number 1 is that they are looking for organizations that promote culture, incentives, and career opportunities. It's all about, I'm looking for an organization where I can express myself. I can challenge, I can grow, I'm going to be paid well. But of course, there's a future long-term opportunity for me. I want to make an impact and a difference. The second thing to keep in mind, everyone, is talent diversity. I'm not talking about cultural diversity, by the way. That is a given. That is a table stakes today. Hopefully your organization is sharing all about what you're doing around this, because the fact is these are individuals that express themselves, which is a really powerful tool they bring. Talent diversity is around experiences and expertise. They're looking for organizations that build a culture in which they have a certain background and the other person next to them has as well. And they can actually share their different experiences together to drive that level of impact. And the third piece, which surprises a lot of clients, including one that I just talked to today, is connectivity. Yes, they still want to connect together. These are not individuals that want to be siloed. But connectivity has a different definition today, doesn't it? We're doing this today on a webinar. Jim and I used to do this in person years and years ago. The fact is, with this world that we live in, there are so many ways to connect to these stakeholders, their customers, employees, and so on and so forth. These Gen Zs, these Gen Zs are looking for more ways to connect, and organizations that promote that. And what you can see on the bottom here, from this indirect path that we took, we pushed the targeted micro-survey market pulse approach to answer the questions of which industries are focusing correctly on excellent culture, connectivity, and this idea of impact and meaning. And you'll see we've got winners and opportunities there. And the report that you'll be receiving in the next few days is going to give you that level of granularity. But what I want to touch on here is whether your industry is a winner or a potential opportunity, this needs to be definitely part of your KPIs in 2022 and moving forward. By the way, we know and hypothesize it's going to be there for 2023 and beyond. Now, here's one piece that you want to keep in mind from these respondents, everything I just talked about, from this emerging Gen Z employee. The fact is, there are three common characteristics we are seeing across those themes I touched on. Meaningful work. They want to drive impact. Jim and I were just talking about this, I think a week ago, Jim, where he's telling me stories where he's heard Gen Zs make millions from cryptocurrencies and so on and leave the traditional workforce, because that is something that they found more meaning towards. So giving them that sense of meaning is going to be very important. Competitive salary. This world that we live in, and Jim and I were also talking about this last year. I remember years and years ago, I had a lot more hair then. When I first graduated from university, I needed to get a job and I needed to get paid and pay off my bills and so on and so forth. That mindset with this new generation has changed. There are so many opportunities for them to grow on a salary perspective as well. And culture and connectivity will continue to be absolutely key. Now, we did this all utilizing mostly indirect data, a little bit of targeted based surveys or micro surveys, I should say, but mostly indirect data. Let me tell you what we did though with those targeted surveys approach, what Jim talked about a few sessions back. Based on everything that I just told you, we thought it would be very important to understand, how do these potential employees and potential customers as well, how would they react to two different scenarios in comparison to other age groups? And let me explain what those scenarios are before I load the actual data here. Scenario one, we asked those respondents, if you walked into a brand and you saw an aggressive customer yelling at an employee, what would your automatic reaction be? And we did this on a very qualitative perspective because, again, this Gen Z group, very expressive, which is phenomenal. The second scenario that we asked another team, so we did an A/B test there, or another group, was around aggressive. Again, walking into a brand, seeing an aggressive customer, but this time the actual employee was yelling back. So there was actually conflict between the customer and the employee, both yelling at one another here. We asked the Gen Z population as the main group that we're testing, and the other age groups, what would the reactions be? And let me go ahead and run this animation now. So we'll start with scenario one, aggressive customer and calm employee. Automatically across all the age groups, 48% of the actual customers had a negative perception of this aggressive persona. Only 6% actually complained or had a negative perception of the employee. So most of this age, or most of this group, had a more negative perception, I should say, to the actual customer and not to the actual employee. And the emerging Gen Z, one common theme that we saw was empathy. They constantly talked about empathy, specifically regarding the calm employee. Now with the open ends team, this is where things got a little bit exciting. Look at how the reactions were across these different generations. Baby boomers talked about, I feel bad for the employees. The Gen X's and Gen Y said, well, where's the manager? They need to go in and support them. Look at the Gen Z or Gen Z response. I would interject. Remember, meaning, impact, being part of something. You know, they would not want to see people being treated that way. Now let's go to scenario two. Again, what if you have an aggressive customer and an aggressive employee? Everyone's just yelling at each other in this kind of current scenario. Here's what's quite interesting. That negative perception about the customer drops by exactly 50 points. Half of the actual customers now said that they had a negative perception on the aggressive customer. But however, when you think about negative perception on the employee, that number has gone up pretty drastically. And the Gen Zs now were less sympathetic to both the employee and the entire brand. Again, look at the qualitative data, everyone. You know, baby boomer would say terrible resolution. A Gen X and Y would say the brands need more training. A Gen Z response would be both the employee and customer are at fault here. That human piece that Jim talked about comes back to life here. So what are we saying with all this insight, all this indirect and social reviews and micro market pulses that we launched and so on. What are we really trying to say here? This particular emerging workforce and your workforce in general is about to go through an updated evolution, and it's going to continuously change in the coming months. As we work with different brands and set strategies, we're finding that those brands had to adapt and change their strategies in order to drive higher acquisition of this new top workforce and talent, and of course to retain these top talent individuals who are starting to move away. So I want to pass it back to Jim now with all this information, because I know there's a lot here to continue that story. And we want to take a little bit of a different direction, right, Jim? We want to actually share with the audience here what the actual future could look like. So let me pass this back to you so that we can jump right in.
Thanks, Radi. Yes, we are going to do this section a little bit differently. So if you've been tracking, this is normally where I jump in and say, hey, look at this client that we did all these great things for. But if you go back to the slide that introduced this section, Radi said Gen Z will revolutionize the workforce. The reality is that this is still happening, full stop, across all industries. And so we're spoiled here at InMoment. We actually have an entire center of excellence, a practice around employee experience. And this team works every day to help our clients create employee experience programs with a true customer experience lens. The new generation of Gen Z employees are really challenging. They're challenging so many norms from generations past. And while we work with clients who are seeing some success in understanding their Gen Z employee persona, this is still definitely a work in progress. And the roller coaster is just getting through the first loop. There is still the potential for a lot of whiplash on the other side. So as we think about this and we sort of leave this section, we do have some ideas for you to help attract and retain these Gen Z workers. So Rod, if you can go to the next slide. The takeaways are pretty straightforward and really focus on being active. So first, keep the Gen Z priorities in mind. Not what has worked for you, unless you're a Gen Z yourself, but then listen to yourself. But what will work for your Gen Z population? And this is not easy. You have to stay ahead of the curve. A lot of people that know me here at InMoment know that I'm like a voracious reader. I read the Wall Street Journal. I get Axios News. I look at USA Today to make sure that I'm constantly keeping abreast, because I'm not in that demographic. So in order for me to help my clients think about it, you have to try to stay ahead of the game and keep listening, because the priorities are changing, and you have to over-index on trying to find that piece of information. Secondly, this is not a soccer match that's two halves or a basketball game that's four quarters. You have to keep listening. There's not a matter of, oh, I heard something, so let me act on it, and then I check the box and I'm done. It gets back to that sort of stay ahead, but it has to be more than just a hobby, and it has to really be focused so that you can learn not only what's important today, but is that still important tomorrow? Is it more important tomorrow, or is it less important tomorrow? So you can't stop. You have to keep listening. And finally, we talk, almost every presentation either talks about a framework or a toolkit. So I'll go the toolkit route with this one. You need to build a toolkit full of processes to keep listening, perks to keep your Gen Z workforce excited, ways to help them grow, opportunities to interact with executives or interact with each other. You just have to make sure that you create the value prop so that it's so attractive that the Gen Zs don't want to take their skill set elsewhere. And I know that sounds really, really utopian, and that's why this is a roller coaster, but those are the things that we are thinking about in our employee experience practice, is helping our clients listen for and build. Radi, anything to add here? And then you can take us home.
No, Jim, thank you for that. And again, everyone, there's going to be so much opportunities in the coming months. So please, please do set this as a core KPI. I cannot tell you how many times Jim and I talk to our clients and brands and partners just about this piece here. Now, again, everyone, we did promise you some time back. We don't want to take the entire hour and really basically have more. So we're going to end here. Thank you so much for listening to us today. I know we have some great questions. We are going to respond back to you personally, so you have more of a personal response. And of course, we can continue that discussion on there. You also will be receiving this recording and the actual report in the coming days. So stay tuned. A lot of great information coming out here. And again, really appreciate the time, everyone. Thank you so much.